Hey y'all, today we're taking a quick look at a keychain-sized mini digital camera that is building off the Y2K nostalgia of point-and-shoot digital cameras before our smartphones kind of cannibalized this entire category. But now there's been a bit of a resurgence since some of these technically less perfect cameras from the perspective of software processing can actually look maybe a bit more organic and providing those nostalgic vibes as kind of a novelty camera or just a toy camera, especially in this case because this sells for under $40. I've also seen it marketed as the RetroSnap, which seems to have an identical design as well as specifications, including the 2 megapixel camera sensor. It just has a slightly different name stamped on it depending on where you pick it up. It also comes with a 32 gigabyte microSD card in the box, which is neat, and also includes 2 color versions, either a white or a black variant, a small 1.4 inch LCD screen on the rear, and it can shoot both video and capture photos. In fact, videos are supposedly 1080p full HD resolution, but it's definitely been upscaled, so it's not going to be very detailed. In fact, probably better for taking photos, although perhaps that's on purpose. Again, having a lower res sensor compared to many of the other alternatives, including the CamSnap that's been quite popular recently, has an 8 megapixel sensor, and that's further compared to most modern day phones having at least 12 megapixels, if not sometimes even higher, like 48 megapixels these days, can objectively give you more detail to crop into. But if you're going after this kind of out of focus fuzzy look just for that nostalgia factor, then perhaps that's why having a lower res sensor can still be a purposeful decision. Now there's also different filters that you can pick on the camera itself, including a kind of monochrome black and white image versus warmer and colder tints, and you can expect roughly an hour and a half of shooting before you have to recharge it again with a included battery base, which is actually quite interesting. This included accessory is basically a mini power bank, so there's already a small battery built into the camera, but you can snap this on to further increase the battery performance. Now taking a closer look at the design here, we have just a speaker and microphone here on the front. The lens is fixed. And it also isn't autofocus, so you have to be at least a feet or two away from your object to capture images that are looking decent, primarily for landscape shots, I would say, but kind of expected for a kind of novelty camera like this. Just a shutter key on the very top, a decorative cold shoe, as well as a small grip here, and there's also a lanyard strap here on the edge that you can pop on. In fact, there's 2 versions they give you, one which is more of this wrist strap style, another one that can hang into a backpack. You'll also find a quick start guide and a USB Type-C cable for charging and data transfer. Now the included battery mod here also has a tripod thread at the bottom, which is actually quite handy since many of its alternatives like the CamSnap here not only is larger but is missing a tripod mount at the bottom. That being said, the CamSnap does have a flash. It's LED, not as bright as a real xenon flash, but this thing doesn't have any external flash. Now on the bottom here, by the way, if we remove the battery mod, you can also find a microSD card slot with the 32 gigabyte card pre-inserted, and also that tiny postage stamp size screen, along with a menu key that you can tap on to change between recording video versus capturing images and reviewing some of the shots that you've taken in the device's memory. There's also up and down arrow keys for changing the preset filters, including again that kind of sepia, green, bluish versus black and white monochrome that you can play with. Now I guess this is at least one benefit compared to the aforementioned CamSnap camera, although it does have an optical viewfinder, which some may prefer if you are shooting in brighter outdoor conditions, but you aren't able to change some of the settings quite as easily. For example, changing filters requires you to plug the camera into your computer and then manually drag over a different file. It's not as seamless as having it built in and a little bit easier to compose with and be able to adjust just by using the up and down arrow keys here. Also, the CamSnap was not able to record video of any kind, even though I consider that as kind of a secondary feature to be honest, but at least it is one mode that is available here that you won't find on that other option. As for form factor and size, here's another kind of novelty camera keychain. It doesn't actually take photos, it's just kind of a dummy unit, though it does have a built-in flash, acting as kind of a flashlight, and it's a replica of the Fujifilm X100 next to it. Kind of impressive that for not that much larger, this thing has a real working camera sensor and is actually a functioning camera that can fit onto your keychain compared to this one being just for decoration purposes. Also next to something like a phone here just to serve as a reference. So primarily here just for fun or maybe for kids to play around with instead of being anything serious, which is expected considering the price as well as the smaller dimensions here. Now maybe a couple of other modes though that would be interesting to see in a revision down the line would be also using it as a webcam perhaps, if plugging it into a computer, if they also made a version with a slightly higher resolution sensor. Also having at least an LED flash could be helpful in slightly darker spaces, as well as maybe considering an optional app on your phone that you can then wirelessly transfer the photos over to, kind of like a car dash cam or security camera would all be interesting to see. But it is what it is. Now you can also take an image just by, again, pressing on the top. There is no OIS, so you have to hold relatively still. Here's also a quick test of the video recording capabilities, so you have to be in relatively well-lit environment for the best results. And after a couple of seconds, the screen can also time out to consume less power. After 5 minutes of not using the camera, the entire thing also goes to sleep. So there we have it, reviewing some of the footage there. Takeaway is, again, objectively speaking, this is definitely not a great camera when it comes to the resolution. Definitely no HDR of any kind, and you can only shoot in JPEGs. There's no RAW capture or any manual controls, of course. So it is all about mindset. If you are expecting to use this as a novelty toy camera, or if you're looking after perhaps one of the world's smallest cameras that you can find with a working lens as well as screen, then yes, it does actually function, which is purposefully a little bit more grainy, less sharp, as if you were in the 2000s once again. So definitely not something to be taken super seriously, but a little bit more fun than I was expecting, and also I like the fact there is that camera mod that can be plugged into. Now, if we're going to be super nitpicky though when it comes to the actual quality of those shots, I would say the CamSnap still edges out ahead from the perspective of processing. For example, with the filters, it just kind of feels like it's a bit more artificial, just slapped on, compared to on the CamSnap. If you've seen some of the profiles like black and white, it does have a little bit more of a convincing film grain effect going on that's not quite as smoothened out as on this particular camera. So I do like the output of the CamSnap just a little bit more, even though both are kind of the same category of being novelty cameras. Plus, a couple of other alternatives would be the Kodak Smile Plus, which is a 2-in-1 instant printer with a built-in camera that's also in this retro form. Might also be a little bit more practical since you can print out images from your phone, sending it over to it using Bluetooth. However, again, this thing is going to be much smaller if you're after the keychain size convenience. Although in that sense, one other camera that comes to mind that is going to be a little bit more professional would be the DxO1. It also is really small, but this thing has a significantly larger 1-inch type sensor inside that's still larger yet than even many flagship grade smartphones. Although it's also many times more expensive when it came out, if you're shopping around on the used marketplace, you can often find these for under $100. Yes, that's still maybe twice the amount of this, but you can get superior looking images from this, which has a similar sensor as Sony's critically acclaimed RX100 series point and shoot cameras. It's going to give you much more usable output at around 20 megapixels. So if you care about image quality, then something like this will still be vastly superior. Although one can argue with more modern day components inside, maybe the vibes of the camera aren't quite as nostalgic or Y2K as this purposefully lo-fi attempt. But on the other hand, with a better quality camera, you can always apply a nostalgic or black and white filter on top of it to kind of give you that look if you do a little bit more processing after you take the images. You'll end up with more versatility there. Plus, if you are after video recording specifically, then there are other small cameras like the DJI Osmo Pocket series, which are going to give you an excellent experience for stabilization that's not significantly larger if you are just traveling with it. Or better yet, a true Digicam from the 2000s that this and the CamSnap are trying to imitate will still often give you superior superior results when it comes to the photo quality, almost always having true autofocus if you're trying to capture macro shots up close, and having the reach of true optical zoom as well. But again, maybe this is just all about the novelty factor and fun of it being keychain sized, in which case the fact that it is even functional at all at the end of the day is still kind of cool, I suppose. Even if, objectively speaking, there are better cameras out there from the perspective of image quality. Now you can check out more details if you are interested in something like this though in the links down below, but for now that's been our video. Thanks for watching here at OS Reviews. That has been the cute keychain sized RetroSnap style mini Digicam.